Welcome to the Joe Cohen Show. Join me as I share my experience with biohacking and invite top health experts to explore the latest technology, supplements, research, and resources for optimizing your body and brain. Hey everyone, after a bit of a hiatus, I am back. I'm going to be doing a little more solo podcasts and I'm going to be trying different things, seeing what people like. But in this podcast, I'm going to be talking about genetics because I think there's a lot of confusion about genetics companies. Every day there's a new genetics company coming out that claims to be better than the next one, and they're usually actually even worse. I want to talk about a little bit about genetics companies so people understand what is out there. What is this whole space about? I want to talk about specific genetic companies. And today I'm going to be focusing on 3x4 Genetics, which is a company that bills itself as a functional genetics company. And I want to go through what are some of the problems with genetics in how functional medicine practitioners are using it. I just want to go through different kinds of information that people understand what they're getting when they get one of these genetic tests, when they don't know what test they're getting, right? Obviously, I am the founder of Decode, but the reason I built Decode as I did was to make it 100x better than these other, what I would consider shitty genetics companies. That was the whole reason the Decode existed, because I saw a bunch of shitty genetics companies and I'm like, this is all shit. We need something that's actually legit scientifically, that has predictive power and that's useful. In Decode, we set out to build that and we have been successful. But still, I think it's important to understand what different genetic companies have to offer. What are they offering? How should you read through the results? What is it telling you? Is it legit? What's legit? What's not legit? So I'm going to be going through each of these companies individually and comparing them sometimes to Decode, but just really going more in depth into what these companies and reports are doing. So let's go through a 3x4 report. So here we have a 3x4 genetics report. This is used by some functional medicine practitioners. And I'm going to go through some of the information. I found this online. So I don't know whose test is this. It's just a demo or whatever it is. Let's look at, so they give you a little bit of a legend here, your genetic results. Let's go through some of these genetic results. So they give you a gene summary. Lay people are not going to understand what these things mean. And basically, what's important to understand when you come across a genetics company that is using individual SNP variants, the impact of each individual SNP is usually less than 1%. And there's some exceptions like ApoE and things like that. If you have a ApoE4, that could be quite significant for Alzheimer's. But generally, and let's say MTHFR is also pretty known, that's also more than 1%. But generally, SNPs are impactful in less than 1%. Now, what 3x4 does is they use a functional genetics approach, which they're looking at genetic variants which seem to have some kind of causal impact. So it seems to be changing gene function on some level. The problem is that even though that, if that's the case, it still has only less than 1% impact on the overall result. So if you have a gene for, let's go through as an example, detoxification, any individual variant is going to have a very small effect. Now, the reason they do these studies, they do these functional studies, they do these GWAS studies, is these GWAS is just looking at a bunch of different genes and trying to understand which genetic variants are associated with condition. The reason they do this is to try to find links between genes and diseases. The problem is that you could sometimes find a link between a gene and disease, even if it's a very small link. So you could still pick up something, even if it's only 0.1% of the total impact, 1/1000th of the total impact, you could still pick it up if you have enough data. The problem is that if you want to try to predict based on 1 or 2 or 3 SNPs, it's not going to be very predictive. Maybe it will be slightly better than a coin toss. And basically what we did at Decode is we actually looked at this and we tried to see, can we look at some of these SNPs and will it predict the getting a disease or anything like that? And the answer was no. And that is the fundamental problem of a lot of these genetics companies, is that they don't actually have predictive power. So one of the things that we did was actually validate that what we're doing is actually predictive. So we could see, hey, look, this is actually quite predictive. If we, based on our AI and millions of variants, we could say, hey, this actually predicts a certain condition to a certain degree. There's obviously a lot of lifestyle factors related to it, but there's still a link. We can still predict it. With these other companies, they don't have any validation papers. And that's what's very key to understand is that if you're lacking these validation papers, the reason they don't have them in part is because it's not there. They cannot actually prove that it's true. And we try to validate some of these things and it doesn't work. You really have to use very sophisticated AI and machine learning and a lot of data, a lot of information. And the problem in the genetic space is that these companies are not investing the money to do that. It costs us $20 million to build these technologies in order to do these predictions and reporting, whereas these companies don't have the funds to do that, and they don't have the desire either because the consumer doesn't really understand that this is a marketing game. Basically, that is the fundamental problem that we see with these genetics companies, these consumer genetics companies, and also functional genetics companies. And that is the difference with self decode is that actually we validated that this is predictive. Now, there is still some role at looking at specific genetic variants or specific genes if you want to try to figure out a pathway. And that could potentially give you some kind of idea of maybe what therapies could be better. And so there is some kind of potential role. And that is how we integrate that in self decode. But I'll show you just the report here. Let's go back to the report. You see a wall of SNPs here and detoxification. Okay. So you see there's SNPs related gene. SNPs is a single nucleotide polymorphism, which is a single variant, a single change in the genetic code. And you could say these are the genes related to detoxification. These are genes related to DNA damage. These are genes related to inflammation. Now, again, with all of these kinds of things, oxidative stress, methylation, these actually involve thousands and sometimes millions of variants. So this is this is definitely not thorough, but they're giving you some functional variants and some variants that may have a slightly bigger impact. The problem again here is they're using a very limited number of SNPs to determine this, usually one or two. They're just looking at, yeah, very limited number of SNPs. Let's go down here. Pro-inflammatory fat high, energy expenditure medium, exercise response medium. All these really require many variants, and they show us which variants they're looking at, which is not nearly enough. So they can't give you any prediction on the overall result. They can tell you these genes maybe have some kind of worse effect. Injury very high, recovery medium, power low, endurance very high. Again, nothing here you can actually predict, and they don't have any validation data for any of this that I've seen, and I'm pretty confident that they wouldn't produce this either. Nutrients, caffeine high, salt medium. Okay. None of these predictions are actually legitimate. When you actually go into the scientific research, often it looks differently. So let's go back to, yeah. And so they're giving you genes here. They tell you beneficial genes. And by the way, these genes are doing a lot of things. They're not only related to one condition. Sometimes a variation here could be good for one thing and bad for something else. When I say sometimes, actually, usually. So a SNP or gene is not in general good or bad. There's pros and cons to each variant, or else it wouldn't have evolved or stayed in the population pool. So yeah, they're giving you basically some genetic variants that may be off in certain of these categories. It's very hard to really understand what's going on here, right? And in this particular report, you have recommendations for each of these things. So let's go through some of the recommendations that we have here. Brain health. Let's see some of the recommendations. Evaluate carbohydrate intake, limit processed carbohydrates. These are basically these seem to be generic recommendations for every report, no matter what you would get. Yeah, like exercise response medium, be mindful of hydration. It's pretty generic, and I don't think you really could gain anything useful from this information here, to be honest. So each of these recommendations are not personalized within a category. They're not saying you have a specific gene here, so therefore you need to do something specific. the recommendations are also per category. So it's per endurance, per this. The problem is that when you have many things going on, it's not taking into account the recommendations for multiple topics, which is a bit of an issue. So vitamin D low, your low gene score suggests you do not require any additional lifestyle recommendations. So that's an example of this is an example of my issues with these tests is number one is there's no validation, right? And actually, even if they try to validate it, they won't be able to because it's actually not accurate. So a lot of these impacts that they have here doesn't mean anything. It's confusing. The recommendations are not sophisticated. They're not targeted to specific genes, and they also do not encompass many different categories. So it's like recommendations for each topic individually. Now, I'm going to go through a comparison to what Self Decode has essentially. And the reason why we basically we created Self Decode and something that I realized within Self Decode is that everybody has their own thing that they like. And so 3 by 4 does a lot of education about here's what you need to know about genetics and here's how to look at different genes and whatnot. So they do a lot of education on these genes. Now, what I realize is that everybody wants something else when it comes to genetics. Some people want this, some people want that, some people want it different structures or different there's kind of like a whole bunch of variations. And because we have the core technology, it's very easy for us to just basically make a lot of these similar reports and make them 100 times better. And so that's what we did. We said, you know what? Everyone has different taste. We have 700 reports already. We have it on every topic and people love it. But there's some people that are like, you know what? I like this. I've been educated in this format and I like this format. So we say, you know what? We'll just recreate reports from all these companies, not take any of their words or intellectual property, but basically look at the genes, look at the SNPs, all that stuff is public. Look at the categories and put them in the same structure, and at the same time make it 100 times better. So let's look at that, and let's look at one of self-decode reports. Okay, so cellular health. This is one of the topics that they have. We're looking at methylation, oxidative stress, detox, and inflammation. Now, again, these are looking at way more variants than the other report, but we put it in a similar kind of grouping in cellular health. So we called it cellular health, and we included similar kinds of reports in cellular health. So this is just about personal taste and how you want things to be grouped. We have systems. This is actually my report. So you can see I have lower methylation ability, and that's true. I do a lot of things for methylation, and still my homocysteine tends to be higher if I exercise a lot. So I need a lot of methylation, and we're talking about 5 grams TMG, pretty much every methyl supplement. So the genetics here is quite accurate. Lower detox, I would say this is true. I've always had issues with just felt like every toxin was affecting me. And yeah, and through the recommendations, I was able to basically counteract this lower detox and lower methylation ability. And so both of them are definitely true. And I've been able to counteract them, and those are not issues anymore. Then we have this category here. It says likely worse memory and brain health, likely low mood, goes through a bunch of worse hormonal balance. Then we have heart and blood vessels, are more likely for artery hardening, and then some things are normal. Energy and metabolism. Yeah, I seem to like I'm less likely to be overweight. That's definitely true. I don't overeat based on and so what we did here is we included these polygenic risk scores that are including millions of variants, like less likely to be overweight. And then we also included certain things like gene reports that we found were very common in functional medicine, like these FTO gene and different kinds of gene reports. And by the way, anytime, if you're a practitioner, if you want to see any gene added to any report, you can let us know. And we can easily just add a gene into a section or add a report into a section and make it even more comprehensive. Very easy for us to do because we built a platform in a way that we provide infrastructure for other businesses and clinics and all these things. So it's very easy for us to make reports of anyone's liking. So again, you could see activity and fitness. We're going through the specific genes that were brought up. And so the report starts with a summary of all different kinds of things, nutrition. So it goes through a bunch of nutrients. And now it goes through the results in detail. Okay. So you could see this is the cellular health. And this is what you could see in each category here now. Predisposed to lower methylation based on 30 genetic variants. And you could see a whole bunch of genetic variants that are putting me at risk over here. And then it goes into details about what are the associations of these variants and different kinds of issues. And then it goes into details of a whole bunch of different specific gene variants and what it means. So it gives a lot of information on each of these genes, but you have this gene table here. And if you've been educated on what these things mean, you could go through some of that with your client. And same thing with oxidative stress. We looked at 38 genetic variants and we give you a total score. Plus, you could also see all the specific genes. All right. So, yeah, basically, this is how the report is structured. So, it goes into a topic. It tells you how many genetic variants we're looking at. In terms of fasting glucose, we're looking at 960,000 genetic variants, whereas these other companies are looking at one, two, maybe three. And we give you these genes that are impactful just for so you understand certain kinds of functional genetic variants. And we give you information on what that means as well. So you go through this report, you could go through all the different kinds of details here, right? So the summary is in the beginning. And if you want to go to the recommendations, by the way, there's a table of contents in the beginning here. So if you want to go to the recommendations, oh yeah, you have results and details for each section. Recommendations, you could just click on over here. So it gives you a just a summary of the recommendations. And what you could do for each recommendation, let's say strength training, it tells you what are all the things in this report that it's helping with. What are all your risks, right? So like strength training helps with cardiovascular disease, mood, ACL injury, ankle injury. So it shows everything that it's helping with. And then let's say we go down here to, let's say zinc. So you could see everything that zinc is helping with, how to take it. Yeah. And all the different things that it helps with. You could see it helps with methylation, mood, and artery hardening. And these are some of the things that were came up in my report. So this is another difference with what we have is when we give you a recommendation, it's based on all of the reports within this topic, right? So all the things related. And the reason is because imagine you take a recommendation for each report that you have risk for. Basically, you're just going to you're going to be doing thousands of things. It's going to become overwhelming. Whereas if you say, okay, give me the top recommendations of all the things that came up in my report. So it's looking at all the information and then it's giving you the things that are most impactful first. And it's telling you how it's impactful. Now, I also recommend looking at this with a practitioner, and I think that could be helpful. So the takeaway is that, and again, we built this report just because some people are like, they were trained in this way of doing it. And it's like, all right, we'll do it. We'll make it 100 times better. And not only can you get this report, you can get all 700 reports. And so it's just way more advanced, way more impactful. And I think it's really unfortunate. A lot of people are buying shit now. A lot of people are using crappy products. And so my goal is to really educate the market. And I want to start with these genetic products. There's a whole bunch of other products that I want to talk about, like different kinds of blood tests. But these are, yeah, I'd say the genetic ones are top of mind because I do have a company that is focused on the genetics technology. And so I think it's important that people are educated. They understand what are the differences between why do I not think that these other companies that are not using our infrastructure, why do I think they're garbage? It's because of all the reasons that I mentioned, right? And so just to sum it up, the risk prediction of what they're actually trying to predict is not good. Number one, we looked into it, right? So it's not good. It's the recommendations are not good because they're just specifically for each thing. They're not personalized very much. Like they don't give you the recommendations for all of the issues, right? It's just not their infrastructure is not built in a way that does more sophisticated recommendations. And then also it's limited, right? And even in terms of the SNPs and whatever and genes, they're looking at a total of whatever hundreds, in the hundreds, whereas we're looking at 200 million. So it's really no comparison between what these companies are providing. And unfortunately, it's a lot of it is marketing and usually the founders of these companies are doing a lot of the education, so obviously they're going to educate and say their thing is the best. But I think it's important for me to educate people and to understand why it's actually that people are wasting their money with these tests if it's not good. It's not like you're getting a Mercedes versus a BMW. It literally is like you're getting a worthless product versus something that is quite useful. I actually think that getting a genetic test is the best investment that anybody could do because of the amount of information that you could get from it. The problem is if it's not accurate, you're just wasting your money. It's important that you do the right test. And I think that we have all different kinds of reports that we basically go, okay, if somebody wants a functional medicine report, we will combine the advanced polygenic risk scoring, basically using many genetic variants with specific gene reports like we've done. So you could see that some of these are advanced polygenic, like using millions of variants, and then some of them are just gene reports. And yeah, and if it says functional, then it's just using functional variants, which some people like, right? And if you like, that's fine. But I think the combination is extremely powerful, like including some gene reports that people are interested in, including very sophisticated technology, and also including, yeah, like certain reports that like hormone balance that are more functional medicine based. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm going to be trying out a whole bunch of different kind of videos and seeing what people like. But just going through each of these companies doing genetics is, I think, important and interesting. But yeah, let me know what you want me to go through. I'll be going through different people's regimens, different supplements, what I think of them, yeah, just a whole bunch of different stuff, different lab testing. I'm doing a lot of lab testing, seeing what I like, what I don't. And there's a lot of garbage, some very good stuff. So stay tuned. Let me know what you want me to do recordings on, and I will do more of those recordings. 67% of listeners aren't subscribed to the show, so please don't forget to show your support by hitting the subscribe button now. You'll not only be supporting the show, but also investing in yourself and your health journey, all while helping to keep us ad-free.